All right. So today we have a very special tutorial for very special people. We're going to make a backrooms. If you know what that is, I'm sure everyone already knows what that is. And so what you're going to want to do is start with a plane, go figure. And that's going to be the floor. All right. And then go ahead and extrude one of the edges up. I prefer the left edge, but you can use any edge you want. And then click on the face and then separate it by, you press the P button and then extrude another edge, to start making your wall. And I kind of put an angled one in there because I guess I like that. And then just sort of make the border however you want. That's basically all I did. One little angled wall and, two other normal ones. And then make your floor, fill it up, of course. You don't really need the last wall. And, it makes it a lot easier when you start putting stuff inside the room. So just go ahead and skip that one. I like to import a reference for a person, so I sort of know the size of the room. His name is Frank. He's a little tall, I think. He's based off the Unreal Engine one, but he's good enough. I'll put a link in the description so you can download Frank if you want to. And then the next thing you tend to see a lot of in the backroom stuff is those office pillars. They're really super square and stuff. So, add a cube and scale it up and stuff. And then select the edges, the long ones. And then bevel that just a bit. And you can use the mouse wheel up and down to make it more curvy and stuff. And then add an edge loop at the bottom to make that little border thing on the floor. And then separate that like we did with the wall on the first part. And something cool I didn't know Blender could do. If you go into your preferences and your key maps, you can type in loop and then find it's about the third one down. You can change it to if you double click, it'll select a loop instead of that silly alt mouse thing. And I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but the regular extrude doesn't work for me like on this part. So if you have the same problem, use the extrude on normals option. It's the third one. And then click the top edge and bevel that and then make it sort of curvy like that. And then you don't have to do this part, but it'll help if you actually use wallpaper and stuff. You select all your faces and then click on your project from view. And then I guess I forgot to record myself doing it. Make sure you delete the faces on the top and the bottom so you got holes because it's easier to unwrap. And then just click one edge on it and click mark seam and then go to unwrap again and it should unwrap really nice. And then on the bottom part, I couldn't really make it straight when you unwrap it. With just one seam, it ends up looking like this for some reason. But I guess that's good enough, because who puts a pattern on that kind of thing anyway? And then you can join your pillar and your floor thing together. And, copy and paste that, or duplicate, and then duplicate some more. And then I ended up beveling the corners on the wall, because walls usually kind of do that. Then add an edge loop on the wall and do the same thing. And then make sure you apply your scale transform because it makes it easier to extrude it. Otherwise, it'll be way too chunky and it'll be really difficult. And then, bevel that top edge again. Make it all nice and curvy. And then the last thing is making the ceiling. And you could use a texture, but when you start trying to put lights in it, I was having a really tough time. It's just so hard to line up the lights, so I actually figured out this freaking awesome way to make office ceilings. Just take a plane and make it a rectangle, and then, extrude and bevel your edges out like that. And, right click shade smooth, and you can add your extra edge loops to get it just right. And then flip it over, RX 180. And then you can unwrap it, but it doesn't really matter. If you want really good UVs, by the way, you should check out this program called Rhizome. I use it all the time. Yeah, it's only like $50 too. It's a really good deal. Besides that, go ahead and add an array modifier and then up the count, till it's as long as your room is. Then add another array modifier and then, start making copies. I think I messed up and put it above the first one, so it made it too short again, but, I'll fix it later. Then copy and paste it, and turn it 90 degrees. And make sure you keep the spacing the same so they're square. Then, get them going the right way and make them super long and stuff. And then just make sure it's, covering the entire room. And then, of course, put it on the ceiling because you don't want the ceiling on the floor and stuff. Make sure you put one just slightly above the other one because I think that's what real ones do, so they're not going through each other. And that's pretty much all the modeling. It's pretty it's actually a bit easier than I thought. It's just Blender's sort of intimidating at first. And then I found a good trick to make your lights line up super perfect. So make a plane and, get it kind of in the right spot. And you can see, I added an array modifier again, but it doesn't quite line up even if you get it close. See, it's already kind of messed up even on the second one. So to fix that, click one of your roof bar things and then click the little computer icon thing to disable the array. And then find out how wide it is. You can scale it and then see which number changes on the XYZ thing. In this case, it's the Y axis. And then record that number and then multiply it by your factor on your array. And then open your calculator. I'm not kidding. Open your calculator and then multiply those two numbers together. And then that's how big you want your light. But, since it's in meters, you got to move the decimal spot over 1. So click the little computer on your light array and then change the width. If you sort of have the shape already, it'll be really close probably. And then if it's a rectangle, just make the other dimension, twice as long. And you should be good to go. I'm really happy it works. I don't think anyone's ever done that, but it makes sense math-wise. See, now they're all lined up and it's super perfect. And that's how you make an office ceiling. All right, now for the fun part, and we're actually going to render it finally. So if you haven't already, add a new texture to your light and then set the emission to about 3. Then add a material to your ceiling bars and turn the metallic up to about 0.7 or 8. Then I turned up the lights a bit, but the video ends at about 3, I think. So just keep it at 3. And then, copy and paste it. Or, you can just put it in another array if you have a huge room. And then for the ceiling, there's a great texture on textures.com. It's called Stucco 17 because there's I guess a lot of stucco. And it's just like office tiles. And then if you're wondering what that little texture panel thing is that I have, I just finished a plugin you can check out. I have it on the video I made right before this one. It's, I figure it's a reasonable price. I have it at $7 on Blender Market. That's an automatic texture maker. It's freaking awesome. And then, go into your shader editor and, tile it some more because it obviously is too big. Then add a basic yellow texture to the wall. I end up turning the roughness down later, but, just do that for now. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a creepy empty office building without creepy office carpet. So get your carpet rolling and then, tile it like the ceiling. Same concept. And then you can add a hue saturation node thing between your color on your carpet to get that nice orange carpet color. And then just mess with the saturation and the values, Then add the wall texture to your pillars. And then you gotta select the little bottom part and, add a new material slot and then make it a different color and then click the assign button. That's how you make textures on different parts of the same model. And then instead of texturing all the pillars, I just kind of, copy and pasted, and did it again since that's pretty easy. And something else that's really cool if you're working with rooms like this, if you click the little white circle and hold the X button or the Y button, it'll move it in that axis, in like the X axis only. It's super handy for doing stuff like this. And then, add your little floor border texture to the wall border thing. And we're almost done. Go ahead and add a camera. And a useful trick for cameras is you can press the 0 button and it'll, get your view on the camera. But then go into the view tab. And then if you want to move the camera around like you do with the viewport, click the camera to view option. And then, and then you can just press the 0 button to undo it whenever you want. And then I think that adding a depth of field really helps. So go ahead and do that. I put the f-stop at about 0.7 and the distance to 50. And that seemed like it worked pretty good. And then I have a great chair that I made that I threw in there, and I'll just leave it in there on my website and you can keep the chair, and use it for whatever you want. And I guess we don't need Frank anymore because it's pretty much done. And then one other thing I liked is I added another light at the very back so it kind of looks like there's a doorway there and there's light coming from somewhere else. It's just kind of dark back there anyway. And then here I changed the roughness on the wall texture to about 0.2 or so. So you get that nice reflection from the lights on the wall. And then I'm sure you should probably do this in post-processing or whatever, but go down to your color management and then set it to very high contrast. And it looks super close to actually the right color, which is freaking awesome. And then just give that a render, and there's really nothing else. There's a little bit of post-processing to make the lights, have a glare to them, but that's pretty much it. So to get the lights to look right, go into your compositing tab. I kind of don't like using it, but whatever. And then click the Use Nodes button. And you should have these two boxes already, but if you don't, just make a render layer and then have a viewer layer. And then click your backdrop button to make your render show up. And, don't worry, it's not just one picture. If you do this, it'll make it work for your entire animation. Then add a composite node and then connect that up. And then what you want to do is you add a glare node and then, hook up the image to the first part and then hook up the other two boxes to the other image thing. And then on the glare type, click fog glow. And that's what you need. And then I like the size about 7 and then a threshold at like 0.5. It looks just like the stuff people put on YouTube. I wonder if they use Blender. I mean, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. And then if you're feeling frisky, you can add a lens distortion node, to get that chromatic aberration going. Just a tiny bit, like 0.02. And I'm pretty sure that covers just about everything. Not that I'm a Backrooms expert, but I really think the result turned out pretty dang good. You know, I always thought Cycles was horrible, but this looks pretty dang close to like super real. And you know, it's really good at the denoiser stuff and it's faster than Octane. So I don't know. Sometimes I might even use it myself. And so I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and especially that office ceiling. Man, that's a good one. I'll put the I'll put a link to the project file in the description and you can keep the chair, you know, and just act like you bought it and stuff. I don't care. 'Cause, you know, I'm trying to make a 3D modeling library anyway. So, you know, I figure you deserve it for getting this far in the video. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time.